All right, so let's import a tracing image. So import tracing image, that was part of that vector drawing suite. I showed importing that poster design. This time, so obviously in the library panels we saw in there, they've got these subject matters. So there was one that we were doing, it was an Egyptian panel. And there wasn't a whole lot of Egyptian patterns, I guess, available out there. And especially one of the more iconic kinds of things that you think of when you think of Egyptian art is the is this the thumb drive? I need a thumb drive.
The conference thumb drive.
Do you guys have the conference thumb drive?
Here you go. It's Harlan's.
All right. So I included these patterns for you guys. So you can go through this same exercise if you'd like. Come on. Well, there we go. Thank you. Okay, import tracing image. All right, so I've got this Egyptian god. Yeah, so this is Horus, but I didn't necessarily need to make Horus. I just needed this profile of the body, because you can throw the different heads on the same body and you have every single god there is. But that body, that iconic profile shape of the body, I couldn't find patterns or anything of this anywhere. I'm like, well, this is fairly geometric. This should be simple enough for me to trace and make a pattern from this. So that's what we did. So you import it in as a tracing image. Now it's on my board. And whenever I do tracing, the first thing I do is I draw a rectangle and create myself a floor. So I decide I'm going to design this pattern at a ½ inch deep. So I go and create that rectangle there and just set a carved region and set the depth of that carved region at a ½ inch. So that way, anything I model now, instead of it being recessed down into the board, it's all going to be coming up out of it, so I can see everything a lot better that way. The other thing that I do is I go to View and Toggle Perspective, as the perspective view will actually give you a difference. So if you're looking head-on on this, but I've got this whole thing recessed ½ inch down, so when I'm drawing, there's actually a perspective to where that is. So the lines I'm drawing on the top of the board may not match up with what's down a ½ inch. But you turn that perspective view off, and all of that goes away, and everything's just straight up and down as you would expect it to be when drawing. So we're going to use that same drawing tool that we talked about earlier, and we're just going to trace around this. So one of the things is that, okay, before you start tracing, is break this thing down into shapes. So no matter what it is, even something that's very flat like this, it's got a behind part, and a middle part, and an above part. So kind of a background, middle ground, foreground to all these things. So let's start with what is the most behind part of this. What's the background of this shape, which is going to be the body, the skin. So everything else, his armbands, you know, what he's wearing here, these things are all on top. So we're going to model those as separate things and put them on top of the base level of this. And so even as complicated as any pattern gets, they're always going to kind of be broke down into this. There's always going to be a background shape that you're going to have to draw, and then you build things on top of it. So this is why this drawing tool is my favorite, because on the fly I can put that point down and I pull that curve out and I match the curve of the shoulder here. I can continue that curve around, and because it's tangent and that's a natural curve, it's going to just fill in the rest of that curve for me. Sometimes you might need to make adjustments there, but for the most part it follows true curves very, very precisely. Then I'm going to just keep following around this guy in the same way, all the way around. And you don't have to be super precise, because all of these adjustments can be made later. Oh, and see this one, this is a perfect example of what it means by tangent. So because the curve was facing in this direction, the continuation, when it's tangent, has to follow that that same trajectory. So I can right click now and I can undo my last vertices, and I can go back and click that and make it red, and that way I can set a new trajectory for the next path. So that make that a little bit easier to understand?
Yeah.
Okay. So now I need to change trajectory again, so I'm going to turn it red and go this direction. All right, and I know a lot of you people are like, oh my God, now he's going fast. And I'm going to have to, just so we can, you're not sitting here just watching me draw all day. But the same principles as what I did in those first few apply to everything I'm doing now.
So some general rule, more or less points, just based on what you're tracing?
Yeah. So you kind of see the beginning and end points of where the curves lie. So I'm going to zoom out. It's like this tiny screen. So a lot of times you'll just kind of pull your point down. This looks like a straight line, so we'll just put a point there and keep that one straight. But especially on something geometric like this, and actually no matter how organic it is, when you zoom in and you're looking at the edges of things, it's all geometric. Even if it's, you know, the fur on a mountain, on a mountain line or whatever it is, you're going to still look at the edges and there's still just going to be lines and curves. So you can kind of see that this line has a starting point and an end point. This curve has a starting point and an end point. So you go to the end point and then you pull the curve around to match it. If you've got a sharper curve that's more arch-like, then you'll probably need to put a center point in that arch so that you can complete the curve all the way around, kind of like we did on the shoulder. We got one point and then we completed it around. And those are some things that when you start playing around with this tool, you get used to really quickly. A lot of people are intimidated. It's like, I just can't figure out this tool. It's like, I promise you can. You just need to play with it. And you can see I'm not being super precise on this. I'm getting a general shape, and we can go and make adjustments afterwards. Which inevitably you always will do. Go make adjustments after the fact.
Hey, Joe, while you're on that, I think you had mentioned that there is an auto trace feature on one of the upgrades.
Yeah. No, he's making a joke.
Oh, that's not true.
Or maybe he didn't realize he was making a joke. I don't know.
It's like that laser Jedi cutter, right?
There are some auto tracing software out there, and in a lot of the drawing programs out there, like Illustrator has a pretty good auto trace functionality. I'm sure CorelDRAW does too. Inkscape has one. So something, especially when it's really geometric like this, you might be able to go in there and auto trace it, and
But your own vectors are always better.
yeah, the amount of cleanup you have to do on auto trace stuff, you generally are putting as much work into it as just drawing it. It sounds like a nice shortcut magic trick, but it rarely is as glorious as you think it's going to be.
Some of that depends on the complexity of what you're tracing.
Yeah, most definitely.
Yeah.
Okay. We're going to, I think, give him a shorter arm on the other side, just to speed this along.
One arm.
He likes to take on that.
Yeah, we'll give him a. He's a wounded warrior here. I'm sure they had them in Egypt too. Okay, and then we've reached the end. Okay. So after you do your drawing, you go through and you can refine things. I've got to turn that toggle control points on again so that you've got your blue edit points. And in some cases like this, where I've got a tangency, it's like, well, if I get the knee right, then the shin's wrong. This is where you would right-click on this point and go to the intersect and change it to free from tangent. That way, it will move separately from the curve, the previous curve. So you can go in after the fact and refine this and get it as perfect as you want to. You can match up these lines so precisely that you can barely see that you drew over it. But for our purposes, we are close enough. So, how should we give this guy some dimension now with this base level? What do you guys think would be a good tool to use? Everybody agree with that? We should puff it?
Joe,
Okay.
can you see it without the background?
Ye-
You don't want to do that.
Yeah, we can. Anytime you want to turn the background off, you just go to the view. So just like when you go toggle between your wood grain and not wood grain, you go up there so you can see what you've drawn without having to stare at your tracing image. So we're going to puff this. We're going to do a bubble puff on this. and it's going to give us a nice organic outline to this guy. And you can kind of see the shading on there, and you turn it off and look at it. It's like, oh, neat, except not neat. It's just kind of blending in. So the thing about puffing is that it will shallow up quite a bit when you get narrow, especially with the bubble puff. So what we can do, since our floor is at a 1/2 inch, instead of making the bubble puff at a 1/2 inch too, let's make it at 0.45. So now it gives me a little bit of a lip around the whole thing. And I can take this, because I don't need it this much puffed. It's kind of tall in areas, so we're going to just shallow it up a bit. I usually start with 50%. It's usually a good starting point just to knock things back and see if they're at where you want. That's probably pretty good. So he's got some nice shaping to him. And we could go in, and if we wanted to get even more detailed, we could go and individually draw these arms and puff those up and actually get, you know, some muscle structure and blend that together. But this is rather geometric, so let's keep it simple. Alright, so we're going to turn our tracing pattern back on, and let's go and add some of his details in here. So we'll start with his, whatever this is called.
Dress.
I bet they didn't call it a skirt. Have a feeling. Okay, so this, we're going to draw and trace over it just like we did the other part. We're just going to follow along. Okay. And we've got a couple options that we can do here. We could puff this too, but the problem with puffing here is that it would end up tucking in on the edges and stuff. It's like this needs to kind of sit on top. So we could do an extrusion where we did like a kind of an arc that swept up, so that make it kind of have a volume to it. But the problem with the extrusion, it's going to go straight up, and it's not going to be able to taper up to these points here. So that might not quite look right. So what other tools do we have that might be appropriate for this? Which one? Well, we could do the extrusion and set an angle at it, but which angle we're going to set it at? Because we want to make this have a volume. So let's imagine that it's arched here because it's going around him. It's got a round base to it, and that kind of fits over his body the whole way up. Well, what I think would work well is our sweep with rails, a 2-rail sweep where we can draw that arc and then it conforms to the 2 lines all the way across. So let's do that, but sweep with rails has to be 2 separate lines, so not a closed shape. So this is where we're going to use our trim tool and remove the top and bottom part of this. So now I end up with these 2 lines. I can select these 2 lines and use my sweep with rails tool and draw that the hoop of his dress, I guess, for lack of a better description. Kilt, Egyptian kilt. we're going to set the depth of the pattern that we're making here at 1/2 inch, and we're going to hit OK and look at it. All right, that's another one that requires us to do the reverse Z because it's crossing over itself. All right, there we go. That's a little bit better. So we look at it and it's like, okay, it's intersecting with the body a little bit too much. Let's go and adjust the depths. And this is the most important part about making patterns, is looking at it. It's like, well, let me try this. That doesn't look right. Okay, let's go try it again. Let me try this, and then let's go look at it. Now that's getting better, except way too high up on his body. So let's go play with the depth some more. And if you're not doing this kind of experimenting, then you're not having any fun. This stuff is fun. Like once you start getting into it and you start actually seeing dimension come from into a drawing like this, and these are not difficult tools to use, and there's not a lot of, you know, high art about it or anything. So now we're looking pretty good. Let's take it and make just a little bit more adjustment. It's still sitting kind of high up. You can see the lip is just a little more than we probably need. Maybe 0.45. Shallow that up. Oh, no, I went too far. All right, we were better at 0.4. So this is what I do all day. I just sit there and go back and forth. It's like tweak here, tweak here, tweak here until you get it right.
You paying for that?
Yeah, some call it pay. All right, so now we can actually even play around with the height of our gentleman here and ease some of those together. Let's get back, zoom out, and look at where we're at. Okay, pretty good start. So let's go back, and you can start adding in some of these other details. So here's this part that probably wraps around the top of his skirt. So that's a really easy, simple trace. And in this one, I'm just going to make a just a flat cuff at 0.4 because the piece underneath it we did at 0.4. And that's going to seem like an, whoops. Make sure you don't have your background selected when you do a flat puff. I'll make it steep sided, so it's just like a raised up square. And I'm going to shallow it up a lot, probably down to like 10. Which seems like an odd thing to do because all I'm doing is making it disappear. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this skirt part that I made, I'm going to put that in a group, and I'm going to move this new section I just drew, put it within that group, and then I'm going to do a merge. So if I do a merge additive, it's going to take that piece that I made and it's going to merge it to the curve of the piece that I made before that. So now I've got that wrap part on the front of his Egyptian kilt. and it's merging following that profile. So we can do the same thing now with this belt. And these are so nicely geometric too. It's very easy to draw. And you can get in all these details. You could go and draw in every single one of these details and do all this with. Do the same flat puff at 0.4. Make it steep. Reduce that height down and put it in to your merge. Actually, since we want both of these items to merge to the skirt, maybe we put the skirt in another subgroup and make that subgroup additive to the other items that are in that group. Does that make sense?
That's where most people have trouble. Yeah,
Grouping with the group.
Groups are really, really useful in that you take elements and you can isolate that element and make it into one without making it into patterns. Now, that skirt, because the skirt is a sweep with rails, has two parts to it. So there's two lines. I can combine those together, put it in this group, and then make that additive to these other things. So if you get into complex situations, it's like, well, I've got this whole assembly of all these pieces. You can put those in a group and then make all of those additive to one thing through grouping and things. It's not as complicated as maybe it seems. Okay, so we can keep building this out. Everything else we're going to build on this is all done in the same way. Exactly as I just showed you. You're going to trace around it and you're going to give it puffs or extrusions or whatever the appropriate tool is. And then you get into the more complicated things. It's like, I got this face to draw. That might be a little more complicated to do. Well, what I did is I went and decided to cheat. I don't want to draw the heads, and I don't want to do all of that modeling if I don't have to. If you have to, then fine. So that leads us to our next part here. So I'm going to go out and find it. So the first thing you always do is I go to the CarveWright Pattern Depot, and you search. It's like Egyptian. What do I got here? And you go and see what kind of patterns are available. Well, this one's.
He needs to refresh those images.
Yeah. This Anubis head is in there. It's in there because I put it there. But I'll show you how I actually found it. But, you know, if you can find, even if I just found a jackal head or a bird head or something, and once I have this body made, then maybe I can figure out how to stick those on there. Or I go to my secondary sources where I go and harvest anything I can find online from all of these wonderful 3D printing sites. The greatest thing about 3D printing is that they have produced a ton of 3D content and they give it away for free. So there's two main sites that I like to go to. Thingiverse. Yeah, it's THINGIVERSE. And on the thumb drive, there's actually a PDF in there where I give you links and lists to all of these 3D resources that we're going to be talking about here. So there's I think it's called 3D Resources PDF, something like that. It's on the thumb drive. So Thingiverse is a 3D site operated by MakerBot. And so they've got all kinds of 3D models up here, and there's examples of things that people are making. And they've got a search tool, so we can search for things. So let's say Anubis, since that's the one where that example. Well, there's a cute little Anubis. That one's not too bad. Wow, these would have been nice to have when I was looking for these models a few weeks ago. And that's the thing, there's constantly having new things added to it. Yeah, these are fantastic. So then you download it. It's like, okay, I want to download this. And it tells you, okay, you have free use of this as long as you're not. No, they say you can free use, commercial use is allowed, remixing, changing, however you want. So they do have licenses on there. Some of them forbid you from altering their models. I've actually never seen anybody say that. They all have this same thing. So you can download these models for free. So let's go to the other site that is my favorite go-to place. It's called MyMiniFactory. MyMiniFactory.com. And this is the same kind of site. They just don't have any specific 3D printer affiliation, but they have lots of 3D models. Now, the significant thing about MyMiniFactory is they have a section of their site called Scan the World. Which you can just go to it or you just search. Not finding the link to Scan the World. But what Scan the World is,
There it is.
yeah, the Scan the World collection. Scan the World is this thing that these guys started with all of the technology out there with the ability to 3D scan with your camera, with free apps on your camera and things. And Michael's going to go into 3D scanning tomorrow in his presentation. But they have developed a method that's like, and this process to get everybody to go out and scan anything and everything they can find. So classic sculptures, whatever it is, it's like get out there and here's our process, go scan it, upload it here. So they've got hundreds, if not thousands by now, of these classic sculptures and things. So this is the Roman emperors category. My internet's being super slow. And these are 3D scans, and the quality of the models is unbelievable. Highly, highly detailed. So this is where we got all the patterns to do that library. So you come in here, I need Anubis. Search, see if you can find them here. There's several Anubises around here too. And you find whichever one you're going to use. And then you open it up. So this was the head I found ultimately, and I brought it in to Sculptor here and just flattened it out. We're going to go through that tutorial process here shortly, and then you save it out, and then you just end up plugging it in to your model. Let's turn this off. flip it around. And you kind of fit it into position until you've got it in there. So draw his headdress on here real quick. Well, we're not going to get all the way finished with this guy. But you kind of get the idea, right? We're going to just keep doing the same thing we did with all of these. We're going to build up around it, merge it, and then you make the whole thing into a pattern when you're done. And you have an Egyptian god. And let me show you the end result. So here was the pattern when all finished. Can you guys see that? We'll put it on the back of this board.
So do you have as many patterns up on the patterns that are for sale as Mike says, or who's ahead? Oh, CarveWright Conference. Oh, yeah.
All right, so that's the finished pattern. You guys can take a look at that in more detail if you'd like, but you can see all these, exactly the techniques that I just showed you, using the puffing tools and the sweeps and just the basic set of tools there, how we were able to combine all that together to create our god. And so this was the only one I made, although I could have found, because I've found several other models that I could have put bird head on here, I could put an alligator head on here, whatever god I needed, or made a whole set of them just so I could sell them as a set in the pattern library. However we want to do that, I can do it. Now that I have just the body created, you can add any heads you want onto it. Okay, so that's tracing and pattern modeling from tracing. It's simple enough, not terribly complicated. So let's go back, because that 3D site, those free 3D models sounds like a really good idea, because the rest of that was a lot of work. So let's just go find some free stuff and let's make patterns from there. So from these sites you can find all kinds of things, objects, whatever you want. There's a third site that recently has become useful. It's Google's 3D Warehouse, which this was like the original 3D site. It's been around for a long time. But the problem with the 3D Warehouse, at least in the early days, was that it was always so bad. The models were really basic and geometric. It was like the equivalent of crayon drawings in 3D. So it wasn't really all that useful. And the things were really faceted and they didn't have good curves on it. But recently it's gotten a lot better. So I was looking for some patterns for the library where my brother collects old cameras, and so it's like, well, we need a pattern of an old camera. It's something, it's kind of geometric. We could probably model it, but there's a lot of parts to it, and you'd just really rather not if you can avoid it. So I found on the 3D site, 3D Warehouse, this one. Beautiful, beautiful model. And sometimes these models can be deceptive when they're colored like this, because it's like, well, I don't know if that's beautiful because it's colored well, or if there's actually a good geometry behind it. But when it's free, it's free. So you download it. And so the problem with Sketchup is that the only way to export to an STL from Sketchup is to own the Pro version of Sketchup. And that means you have to spend money, and I don't want to do that. So that's why I've avoided the 3D Warehouse. I don't want to buy Sketchup. But there's this other file type that has showed up recently. I don't know how long they've had this, but this collada file. And so I experimented with that. What's a collada file? That's an error, apparently.
That must have cut you off, find out what you're doing.
Yeah, maybe. Well, I did download it. There it is. So anyways, the collada file, I'm just going to show you the process. It's not letting me download it. It downloaded before. I got it. Let's try.
Is that a different camera?
No, that's the exact camera.
Bellows.
Okay. Something wrong with that particular one. So we'll open this one just so I can show you the process of how you work with a collada file. So it's nice if you can go to a site and they just have STLs you can download, but what if you find a model that's not an STL and it's in some other format? Well, there's this free program out here called Meshlab. And Meshlab is just an open source free little tool that mostly what it does is allow you to just open up files and fix them and convert them to STLs. So it opens up almost every 3D format out there and then gives you the option to export as an STL, and it makes good STLs that our software has no trouble opening. So I cover Meshlab in probably a dozen tutorials because I use it all the time when I'm finding 3D stuff. So you guys can learn a lot more about Meshlab through there. But the main thing is that you open up your collada file in Meshlab and then save as STL. Then you can go to your import STL file. What is that?
Somebody's iPhone or phone.
Okay. All right, so then we we've got it converted to an STL. We're going to open in the STL importer, and it shows up here. We're going to orient it to more useful. It shows up pink, which you find this a lot with, especially the 3D warehouse stuff. I think SketchUp is notorious for making their models inside out. So we've got this checkbox here that flips the normals around. So there's still parts of it that are pink, but it'll be fine. All we're wanting to do here in STL importer is scale it, which it's fine as it is. It's about 8.5 inches long. And then we're going to go to the next window. So what I'm wanting to do is, and somebody asked me last night, they ran the library, and there's a radio, and it's kind of tilted at an angle. So I want to do this. I want to yeah, I clicked. I just want to move my slicing plane at an angle so that I can see this camera when I make it into a flat pattern. I can see it at a slight angle rather than just having the straight up profile. So you use your tilting and set your angle how you want. And you're looking at this yellow piece right here. That's pointing at where the view is going to be. So and so then you're going to want to just clip off a tiny bit of the back of the pattern. You're not really looking to slice this. You're just trying to set an angle, but it's going to require that you have at least a little bit of a bite out of I'm going to set my slicing distance there. Alright, that should be good. I'll make my cut. I just cut off the back corner. Now it's at an angle. So I'm going to go next, and I'm going to save this as an STL file. So I'm not going to save it to my pattern library, because that would just make a really giant, thick, unmanageable pattern. I'm going to export it back as an STL file. Say Veen. Nobody can read that.
Yeah, we can.
All right. So now we're going to open Pattern Sculptor again. In Pattern Sculptor, we're going to load up that slice I just made. And it's going to show it the STL file in Pattern Sculptor as well at our right angle. And we can scale it to whatever size we need it. And here it made it 25 inches long. Okay. Alright, so now it's in Sculptor. And you can see what Sculptor did is, because Sculptor is only going to work in that up and down dimension, because it's going to make relief patterns. So it just filled in all of that detail there behind it. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my Z-scale, because I don't think I can lower any of this without losing details. So Z-scale, I'm just going to shallow up that Z-scale. And I usually go all the way down to 0.1 whenever I'm making a pattern. That is way too dark, isn't it? Alright, so 0.1 shallows it up because it was giant like this, right? 0.1 shallows it up to a reasonable pattern thickness. And from there, if I need to, you can go and edit some things, you can smooth some things, but this one's ready to go. That's all I really need to do to it. I could even do a relief, fast relief enhance, but I don't think on this one there's any need to it. It seems to be really nicely detailed, angled view of this old camera. So I'm just going to hit accept and export, and I'm going to export it as a PTR, which PTR is it's like a PTN. PTN is our pattern format. PTR is just a raw version of that format. So that means I can just save it. To that format and then go back to Project Designer, File, Open, and then open that PTR file, save it to my favorites, and now I've got that pattern. Let's open a new file. It came in kind of deep, but that's alright. Just change your depth, set it to the depth you want, and now I've got this wonderful pattern. That was totally free and only took me a few minutes to flatten out and set an angle on and turn into something pretty awesome. And that's the kind of quality pattern that you can put some pretty good money on in the Pattern Depot too. So is that cool? All right. So you've got so many things in these 3D sites that you can work with, and with the Scan the World one, and I hope as many of you as possible can come to see the library because it's really neat, and at least there's examples of the panels and stuff that we've carved in that other room there. And you can go now that you see this, and you can go and look at those, and that's how we got that George Washington face. That's how we got the cannons. That's how we got the soldiers that are lined up there. We got them all from these sites here. So let's do a face then. Faces can be tricky, but they are really powerful, especially when it's somebody that somebody will recognize. So let's load in. I downloaded this Ben Franklin from that Scan the World site, and everybody recognizes Ben Franklin. He's on our money. So when you're opening, and I just opened this right into Sculptor, so I didn't need to go through STL importer on this one. You can open these STLs and right into Pattern Sculptor if they're facing already the direction you want. So if you wanted to rotate it, put that angle on it, that's the only reason why you would open it in Slicer first. So otherwise, you can just open it directly here in Sculptor, and it's telling me this is too big. It's got 120 inches tall. Probably don't need it that big. So I'm going to set my highest dimension at like 20. It's not letting me type in numbers for some reason. No, there isn't such a thing. All right, there we go. So it's down to 20 inches tall, much more reasonable. Now the green light's on, I will accept this file size. If it's too big, it's just going to tell you no until you size it down to something more reasonable.
When
All
you
right.
say too big, what do you mean too big file size, too big size for carve?
Too big dimension-wise, yeah. And so that's what it's doing. So it's got your scaling options, dimensions there right next to the thing that says too big. So make those sizes smaller. All right. So now this came in, and he's
Filled in the back.
yeah, he's just filled in the back and the detail, all the undercuts, everything that you're not going to get from the front angle. So this case, we're going to lower it. So the first thing here on the import window is you've got these tools here. So we're going to lower it, and we want to lower it just to the point where we're starting to make things disappear. Like there goes some of his hair, and then we're going to back up so that we don't lose any of that hair.
Yeah, you don't want to lose hair.
Yeah. All right, and then we're going to do that Z-scale again. We're going to shallow it up to that 0.1. So we've made it now into basically a flat pattern. But he's kind of featureless. There's not a lot of detail left in the old guy here. So we want to try to pop out some of those details again, so that when we carve it, it doesn't just seem like this really flat, shallow mass in kind of the rough shape of Ben Franklin. We want it to actually look like Ben Franklin. So we're going to use our bas relief tools over here. This is still in the import tab. You're going to turn it on and then set your options here. So grid size, contrast factor, and smoothness are your three tools here. Grid size, it does what it says. There's a grid to how it's going to go through and apply this contrasting algorithm. So it's going to try to look at this whole thing and increase the contrast in the details without increasing the height. So it's almost like a leveling or a coining, as we call it sometimes. Because on a coin, you look at the relief on those, and everything's the same height, but yet the details are all there somehow. So it doesn't, it's very recognizable. So this is kind of creating that same kind of effect. So whenever I do this, I always increase my smoothness first, and maybe increase the grid size a little bit. And I don't touch the contrast factor in the beginning. Smoothness is going to be the best tool you've got, because if you don't use enough smoothness, then you'll actually see the grid and you'll end up with this blocky looking mess, which if this didn't take so long to process, I'd just show you an example of that. So we're going to move this smoothness up and increase the grid size up, and then we're going to apply this and see how the enhancement works. We're going to sing some songs while this happens or something, because it processes, it's got some big algorithms that does this. Huh? Elevator music? I probably could. Well, while that's doing that, because this is my last example that I'm going to be showing here before lunch, and we got about 10 minutes. Let's get some questions in before we go.
Can you scan a person's face?
You can scan a person's face, and Michael, I hope, will be maybe enlightening us on some possibilities of that tomorrow.
Well, okay.
Yeah, Michael's doing a presentation on 3D scanning tomorrow, right? And so he's explored all the techniques out there, and he's going to share them with us on how to do some stuff, right?
Not all of them, but a lot of them.
Oh,
Enough to fill a class.
I need 2 days to do the whole.
well, the accessible options I would assume that. Yes, but you absolutely can. And I know Chester was playing around with some software a while back that allowed you to make people's faces too, which looked pretty neat. There's an app on the phone called 123D Catch, and everybody's got a smartphone. You can go and download it right now for free. And
I'll be showing that
yeah, yeah. So we get it downloaded now. So for ready for Michael's class, it allows you to use the camera on your phone to take a bunch of pictures of something all around, and it will turn it into a 3D model of that object. 123D Catch.
Catch, C-A-T-C-H.
CATCH. 123D Catch.
Desktop version, that's actually what I prefer to use. It's quicker to upload photos from
Yeah.
you can download the app for your phone, you can also download it from your computer.
I want to know, you have to have STL importer to do anything with the model.
Not so like this example here with Ben Franklin. No. This is just using Sculptor. The only time I used that STL importer was just so I could tilt and get that angle out of that camera. So I have a lot of manipulation capabilities because of the slicing capabilities of Slicer. I can go and set angles to things and then bring them into Sculptor and do the rest of the pattern modeling.
Okay, Joe,
Mm-hmm.
you're just demoing, if I got this right, demoing how you use the flash card. This is about how you actually get it, I think the small actual hits you do on the rotary jig.
Yeah, those are done on the rotary jig, and tomorrow morning I'm going to start off the day with the rotary jig. So we'll show that off then, because that gets even simpler to do the 3D stuff on the rotary jig. You just import it, make sure it's sized right, and let it go, and you don't hardly need to do anything. All right, any other questions? I don't believe you that you don't have other questions. Yeah. Uh-huh.
I have Sculptor, but how do I get it into Sculptor?
The icon up here,
Uh-huh.
click on that, and then it brings up your menu to load files. So you can open up your STL files, OBJ files, which is another 3D format, and PTNs and PTRs, and what's the other? Yeah, you can open up image files, PNGs, JPEG, stuff like that, and yeah, Sculptor can be launched through Project Designer. If you double click on your patterns in your pattern library to edit, you can launch it from there. You can go to your file menu and select Launch Pattern Sculptor. Or you can run Pattern Sculptor on its own. You can open it directly from your applications folder and just run it without even going through Designer.
Which when I was doing some that is, it was faster. It once in a while, for whatever reason, designer closes, then I have to reopen what you're all out of editing from that, and that's only the sculpture.
Yeah, I often just go to Sculptor directly too, especially when I've been doing stuff like this,
Right.
because I go and spend all morning finding models and downloading them, and I got a download folder full of models, and then I just open Sculptor and I go through this process one at a time with them and start cranking out patterns, and then I fill a folder with the PTR file, which is what you save out of here as, and then I just go and open all those PTRs in Designer, and it opens up just like it would open up any other pattern, and then I fill up my pattern library and then start designing my panels. So it's a pretty easy workflow.
not if you're gonna do a lot of easier. And so, you know, a really tough job to have to do is getting into
I know, it's terrible.
Can you puff or extrude or something and then put a pattern or a texture or material on top of that? Or does it some kind of conforming thing so it matches?
It's about to change.
Those last 4 percentages will take forever. Ooh, 3. You can do everything you just said. Yeah, you don't. There is no have to do in anything when it comes to designing. So yeah, if you want to apply a texture, merge it over the shapes that you just modeled. You've got multiple shapes that are merged together and building up, and then you want to apply a texture to it. Totally can do that.
And you just use the word function, you don't have to put conform and that stuff.
Conform is only for VCarve stuff. Yeah. So you would just use the merges, and if you want to, and that's why the groups are really useful too. Because like, well, you know, like on that skirt that I was drawing on the dude, if you want to apply a texture just to that skirt, but not to the rest of his body, that's why you would put it inside a group, because then you can make that merge only associate with that one piece rather than everything.
So I thought your idea last night when we were talking after class, black idea, that,
Yeah.
that how many suggested that?
Well, I actually want to do a live demo of that. But yeah, on Wayne's, on Wayne's police badge that he was showing everybody yesterday, which he did a great job on it once he got that graphic. And it's always better to get a graphic instead of a photograph. The only time a photograph is ever acceptable is if you're doing a lithopane, or if you're using it for a background texture and you're shallowing it down to 10%, and it's not recognizable other than just it's a texture. You don't import photographs to carve into wood if you want it to look good. There are some techniques out there, and some people have figured out ways to do some of this, but you've got to have the right photo and you've got to have the right technique. It's very risky, and probably you're going to end up with something that looks terrible. So if you're going to import graphics to carve into wood, they need to be graphic, not photographs. So Wayne's police badge was a perfect example of this, because he was trying to work with all of these photographs of this, and he's trying to carve a graphic from this photograph. You're never going to get there unless you trace over it and you draw it out yourself. Luckily, he found that somebody had already done this, and they gave him the graphic, which imports perfect, because that's what it is. It's a graphic. You're trying to create a graphic, so you start with a graphic, not a photograph. There's a difference, huge difference. But I was telling Wayne last night, it's like you need to take that one step further. Now that you got this great graphic, you can use the outline tool in Designer and then put a bubble puff on that and then merge that thing to it. So you've got the whole shape of the badge as well.
I thought that was a great idea.
Oh, it's going to look great. We're going to do it tomorrow. All right.
Do you need the badge?
Yeah, I'll need that graphic. Yeah, let's go eat some lunch. I'm going to tell this Ben Franklin to render some more and see if we can get a better relief out of him. That's where I go next. So the first thing I always do is the grid size and the smoothness, and then I'll start inching the contrast up. So sometimes some of these can take a lot of time to do just because of the rendering time involved, but the results are so worth it. Like, just go look at the George Washington in the next room on that panel in there, and the results are great. So it's worth the time and effort to do this. And so we're going to start putting a bunch of these in our pattern store, the Famous Faces collection or something. Because there's so many. They're free. Just download them, they're free.